When Jessica told me she needed a week alone to find herself, I almost believed her, until a friend spotted her at a romantic seaside hotel with someone else. That was the moment I stopped waiting for her and started taking my life back. By the time she returned home, I wasn't the man she'd left behind. My name is Eric, and until this year I thought I understood what trust meant. I'm 37, living in Seattle, working as a project manager for a mid-sized tech firm. My wife, Jessica, was always the more spontaneous one between us. She taught yoga part-time and had a habit of dropping ideas into conversations like pebbles in a pond, waiting to see if I'd noticed the ripples. One Tuesday evening, she did it again. We'd just finished dinner. No TV on, no music playing. Just that quiet you get after years together, when you think you know the person sitting across from you. She set her fork down and looked at me with a calmness I mistook for thoughtfulness. "I think we should take a week apart," she said, her tone soft, almost practiced. At first, I thought I'd misheard. A week apart wasn't something we'd ever discussed. She leaned back and folded her hands. "Not because I'm unhappy," she went on quickly, as if she could feel my confusion. "I just think some time alone would help us appreciate what we have." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to believe this was genuine, a simple need for space. But there was something about the way she avoided my eyes that made my stomach tighten. "Where would you go?" I finally asked. She hesitated a fraction of a second before replying, "There's a small place near the coast. I thought I'd stay there, just be by the ocean, clear my head." She used the word thought, not thinking, like she'd already arranged it. I knew her well enough to recognize the difference. "Sure," I said, because arguing would have been pointless. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat, like it belonged to someone observing their own marriage from the outside. The next morning, she left early. She didn't hug me goodbye or kiss my cheek. She rolled her suitcase to the door, paused just long enough to say, "I'll text when I get there," and walked out without looking back. I stood in the hallway listening to the silence she left behind. That's when I noticed her wine glass still sitting on the coffee table, half full. I picked it up and dumped it in the sink, trying not to read meaning into every detail. But it all felt deliberate, like she'd planned her exit carefully and wanted me to accept it without protest. I tried to go about my day as if nothing had changed. I made coffee, opened my laptop, checked my work emails. But every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the clock. I told myself I wasn't waiting for a message, but the truth was harder to ignore. By evening, I still hadn't heard from her. I thought maybe she'd call when she settled in, maybe share something reassuring to keep me from spiraling. Instead, at 11:07 p.m., a text arrived. "Settled in. Don't wait up. Nothing else. No, I miss you. No, I'll call tomorrow." I read it 3 times. The phrasing felt off, like she was out late with friends instead of supposedly seeking solitude. I didn't reply. I turned the phone over and left it screen down on the counter. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake wondering if this was the start of something we'd never be able to fix. When the sun came up, I was still in the same spot, replaying her words in my head. By mid-morning, my cousin Mark called. We hadn't spoken in months. He sounded cheerful at first, asking about work, how things were going. Then his tone shifted. "Hey, is Jessica with you?" he asked. I felt something in my chest tighten. "No," I said. "She's at the coast for the week." "Huh," he said slowly. "I was at Oceanside Bay last night for a client dinner, and I thought I saw her. She was with someone. Looked like a date, honestly. But I wasn't sure, so I didn't go up and say hi." I closed my eyes. "You're sure it was her?" He paused. "Fairly sure. She was wearing that necklace you got her in Napa. Look, I hope I'm wrong." I thanked him and hung up. I sat there a long time, staring at the floor. I wanted to believe she was alone, that this was really about self-reflection. But the part of me that had been quietly watching all along, the part that noticed her sudden distance over the last year, already knew better. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared bank account. There they were, plain as day. A dinner at a seafood restaurant near the resort, a charge for a couple's massage, and a reservation for a 2-night stay at the boutique hotel Mark had mentioned. I didn't slam the laptop shut or curse out loud. I didn't feel rage. Instead, I felt something quieter and more final. A recognition that the woman I married wasn't coming back, because she'd left long before she packed her bag. I sat back in my chair and let the truth settle in. This wasn't a test. It wasn't about clarity or growth. It was the softest way she could find to walk away from what we'd built together. And as I stared at those charges on the screen, I decided I wasn't going to be the man who waited for her to figure out how to say it out loud. After seeing the transactions, I knew I had a choice. Confront her immediately or gather everything I needed to protect myself. I decided on the latter. That morning, I called Mason, a friend who also happened to be an attorney specializing in family law. We'd known each other since college, and I trusted him more than anyone to be discreet. He picked up after 2 rings. "What's going on?" he asked. I told him everything. How Jessica had left under the guise of space. How Mark had seen her. How I'd found evidence she wasn't alone. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Mason was quiet for a moment. "You ready to move forward?" he asked. I exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I'm done waiting for her to be honest." "All right," he said. "Let's start by freezing joint assets and setting up an account in your name only. I'll draft a preliminary separation agreement. If she's serious about ending this, it'll be cleaner if you're prepared." I hung up and felt an unexpected calm. Maybe it was the relief of no longer pretending everything was fine. Over the next 2 days, I moved deliberately. I opened a personal checking account and redirected my paycheck. I changed the passwords to my personal email and cloud storage. Anything she might use to keep tabs on me later. I didn't do it to be spiteful. I did it because I'd seen too many people blindsided in divorce, left scrambling while their ex cleaned out accounts. Each small step felt like reclaiming part of my life. Her texts trickled in every night, brief and impersonal. "Long day today. Hope you're okay. Thinking about you. This is harder than I expected." I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret. On the 3rd day, I decided to visit the storage facility near our neighborhood. I rented a climate-controlled unit and signed a 2-month lease. Afterward, I drove straight home and began sorting her things. There was no anger in it. No desire to hurt her. I packed each box carefully, labeling them by room, so she wouldn't have any excuse to linger later. When I carried the first stack into the garage, I realized how much of our shared life was really just her preferences I'd agreed to by default. That night, she sent a longer message. "I know this has been strange. I just needed to remember who I am. I'm hoping you understand, even if it doesn't make sense right now." I read it twice and set the phone down without replying. The following morning, Mason called with an update. "The preliminary agreement is drafted," he said. "I recommend you don't serve it until she comes back. You don't want her to claim she was blindsided." "Understood. You okay?" he added. "I will be." He didn't push. On the 4th day, I boxed the rest of her things. Framed photos from vacations, books she insisted we buy but never read, and the trinkets she'd picked up in little shops we'd visited together. None of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. By afternoon, everything she'd left behind was gone from our living spaces. I walked from room to room and felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, Jessica called for the first time. I watched the screen light up with her name. I didn't pick up. She left no voicemail. An hour later, she texted, "Hey, I know I've been distant. I needed to clear my head, but I miss you. I think this time apart has helped me see what matters." Another message followed almost immediately. "Can we talk when I get back? I have some ideas for how we can reconnect." I set the phone face down and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't feel tempted to reply. There was nothing she could say that would make any of this okay. On the 5th day, I met with Mason in person. He handed me the paperwork, neat stacks with clear labels and signature lines. Seeing it all spelled out in black and white made it real. "When she returns, you'll give her this," he said, tapping the top page. "Explain you're not interested in a negotiation, just resolution." I nodded. "You're doing the right thing, Eric. Doesn't feel good. It's not supposed to." That night, I lay in bed and finally allowed myself to think back over the last year. The late nights she stayed out with vague excuses, the moments she turned away when I tried to talk. All the little signs I'd chosen to ignore because it was easier to believe she was still the person I married. I closed my eyes and promised myself I wouldn't make that mistake again. The next morning, I moved the last few boxes to storage and dropped the key at her sister's place. No drama. No explanation beyond, "She'll need this." Her sister didn't ask questions. She just took the envelope and nodded, like she'd expected this day to come. When I returned home, I sat down and looked around the now simpler space. It wasn't empty. It was mine. That was the moment I realized I was no longer waiting for Jessica to come back. I was waiting for her to see that I was already gone. The day Jessica came home was bright and clear. I remember thinking how ordinary the weather felt compared to the finality of what was about to happen. She texted me an hour before she arrived. "Driving back now. Can't wait to see you." I didn't reply. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the agreement Mason had prepared, the storage receipt, and a single house key placed neatly beside the envelope. I heard the car pull into the driveway. The front door opened slowly, followed by a pause. Maybe she expected to find me waiting with relief, ready to pretend the last week hadn't happened. "Eric?" she called, her voice lighter than it should have been. I didn't answer right away. I waited until I heard her steps approach the kitchen. When she saw me sitting there, she stopped. "You look serious," she said carefully. I didn't bother acknowledging the observation. Instead, I motioned to the envelope on the table. "What's this?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. "Everything you'll need to move forward." Her brow furrowed. She picked up the envelope and flipped through the contents. Her hand stilled on the first page when she recognized the separation agreement. "I don't understand," she said, her tone shifting. "Yes, you do," I replied. Her eyes darted back to me. "I thought this week was about finding clarity, about giving us space." "You found space," I said evenly. "But you didn't find honesty." She looked down again, silent. I could see her replaying every lie she'd told, every half-truth she'd offered as justification. "You were never alone," I continued. "You were at Oceanside Bay with someone else. You paid for a couple's massage. You stayed in the same room. I've seen the charges. I saw your photos." She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it without a word. "This isn't a confrontation," I said. "It's a conclusion." Her voice wavered when she finally spoke. "I made a mistake." I nodded. "You did. I didn't mean for it to end like this." "Neither did I." She set the envelope down and reached for my hand. I didn't move. Her fingers hovered an inch above mine before she pulled them back. "Can we talk about this?" she asked. "No," I said. She tried to gather herself. "Eric, please. We have years together. You can't just—" "I'm not erasing the past," I interrupted. "But I won't pretend it still matters the same way." Her expression changed again, confusion, then disbelief, then something like fear. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked quietly. "Your things are in storage. You have the key. And tonight, there's a rideshare waiting outside. You can stay wherever you want, but you won't be staying here." She stared at me, searching for any sign of hesitation. There wasn't any. "You planned this," she said, her voice small. "I accepted the truth," I corrected. Jessica looked around as if the house itself might answer for her. But all she found was the evidence she'd left behind. Empty picture hooks where our photos had hung, bare spaces where her things used to be. Her hand touched the edge of the table, steadying herself. "I thought we could fix this," she whispered. I stood. "I know." She swallowed hard. "You won't even hear me out?" "I heard you the moment you left," I said. "And I heard you again when you didn't come home alone." She looked at the envelope again as if hoping the papers might change. "I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured. "You did," I said simply. "That's what happens when you lie." We stood in silence for a few seconds. The kind of silence that means there's nothing left to salvage. Finally, I stepped past her toward the front door. She turned to follow, but I stopped. "Don't," I said. This isn't going to be a conversation that drags on for weeks. It's over. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her shoulders sagged as she looked down at her feet. The car pulled into the driveway. I watched her glance out the window, realizing she really would be leaving with nothing but her bag and an envelope that marked the end of everything we'd built. I hope you find what you were looking for, I said. She didn't answer. I stepped outside and waited while she picked up her suitcase. When she finally crossed the threshold, she paused and looked back at me, her eyes searching for any sign I might change my mind. I didn't. She walked past me without another word. I waited until the car door closed before I re-entered the house. It didn't feel empty, felt finished. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock. For the first time in years, I felt certain I'd done exactly what needed to be done. After Jessica left, the house didn't feel like a monument to failure. It felt like a space that finally belonged to me alone. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where she'd paused to plead for another chance. I waited for regret to show up, but it didn't. Instead, there was only a steady sense of relief that I hadn't backed down. The next morning, Mason called to check in. "How did it go?" he asked. "She's gone," I said. "You holding up?" "I'm better than I expected." That's usually what happens when you stop letting someone else decide how much you're worth. I didn't argue. By noon, I'd finished emailing the signed documents back to Mason. He promised to file them within the week and get copies to her attorney. I didn't know if she'd already hired one or if she was still in shock. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Over the next few days, I moved through the house making small adjustments. I took down the photos of us on vacations I couldn't look at without feeling the weight of her deception. I boxed them neatly and stored them in the garage. I didn't throw anything away. I just didn't want her memories taking up space on my walls. Each night, she sent a new message. "I can't believe this is happening. Please don't shut me out. Can we meet to talk it through?" I read them all and didn't respond. I knew replying would only open a door she needed to find closed. On the fourth night, she called. I watched her name appear on my screen. It rang until the call went to voicemail. A minute later, she tried again. Then she gave up. Instead of answering, I went for a walk. The streets were quiet, and the air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about what came next. I didn't have answers, but at least the questions were finally mine to ask. The next morning, I received a text that almost made me laugh. "I hope you're willing to work through this. I've been reflecting, and I think this could be a fresh start." It was the same logic she'd used when she left, framing her choices as experiments, as if I should applaud her for needing space. Only now, she realized the outcome wasn't something she could control. I didn't reply. Later that afternoon, Mason forwarded a confirmation that the preliminary filing was complete. The official notice would reach Jessica within 2 business days. That evening, I made dinner for myself, something simple, and sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. I read through every page carefully, making sure there were no loose ends she could use later to stall the process. By the time I finished, I felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment. The next morning, I stopped by the storage unit to confirm everything was in order. The manager handed me the paperwork showing the lease was paid in advance for 2 months, just like Mason had arranged. I left the facility feeling like a piece of unfinished business had been put to rest. That same day, I received another text from Jessica. "I'm staying with a friend. I still think we should talk. Please don't ignore me forever." I didn't reply to that either. A week passed, and the messages slowed. When they did come, they felt more resigned than urgent. "I wish you'd let me explain. I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." I didn't need to hear her justifications. She'd already said enough by choosing to leave with another man and expecting to walk back into the same life without consequence. At the end of that week, I met Mason in person to finalize a few details. He asked if I wanted to request mediation or attempt any settlement discussions. "No," I said simply. "I just want it done." He nodded and didn't push. That evening, I sat alone in the living room and felt something like peace settle over me. The truth was simple. I had been loyal to someone who wasn't loyal to me. That didn't mean my loyalty was a mistake. It just meant it had been wasted on the wrong person. 2 days later, she sent one final message. Are you really going to end our marriage without even meeting to talk about it? I read it and let it sit there without a response. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with the results. I knew I could have answered. I could have agreed to meet, to let her explain all the reasons she thought what she'd done was somehow necessary. But I didn't see the point. When someone shows you who they are, you don't have to keep asking them to repeat it. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Weeks passed without any more messages from Jessica. The silence felt like proof she finally understood there was nothing left to negotiate. I went back to work and settled into a quieter rhythm. People noticed the change, but most were too polite to ask. A few colleagues offered generic sympathy when they heard through mutual friends that my marriage was over. I nodded, thanked them, and didn't elaborate. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped pretending everything was fine. One Friday, I got an email from Jessica's attorney confirming she'd signed the preliminary agreement. Mason called me later that day. It's official now, he said. She's not contesting anything. Good, I said. You okay? I am. He paused. You did the hard part, Eric. It doesn't always go this cleanly. It didn't feel clean, I admitted. It never does. But you were decisive. That counts for something. After we hung up, I sat in my office and let the reality of it settle. I'd spent so long believing that marriage was something you salvaged no matter how bad it got. But the truth was simpler. Commitment doesn't mean much if only one person honors it. That weekend, I started rearranging the house. Not to erase everything Jessica and I shared, but to reclaim it as my own. I moved furniture around. I repainted the guest room a color she never liked. I donated the art she'd insisted we buy to impress visitors. It wasn't about spite. It was about removing the parts of my life that had only ever been for her. I also started seeing Elena more often. She'd reached out to me after hearing about the separation. First, we met for coffee just to talk. It felt easy in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't ask for details. She didn't push me to rehash every moment that led here. With her, I didn't feel like I had to perform or explain. We were just two people figuring out what came next. A month later, I ran into Jessica at a mutual friend's housewarming party. She walked in and stopped when she saw me. For a second, she looked like she might turn around and leave, but she didn't. Instead, she walked over. Her eyes searched mine for any sign of regret or softness. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi." She glanced around the room, then back at me. "You look different." "I am." She nodded, but her expression didn't change. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, almost under her breath. "I know," I replied. "But you did." She looked down at the drink in her hand. "I thought you'd eventually talk to me." There wasn't anything left to talk about. Her eyes lifted again. "You really don't want to understand why?" "I understand," I said. "You wanted to feel something you couldn't find here. You told yourself it was about clarity, but it was really about escape." She opened her mouth, then closed it without answering. "You're not the first person to look for happiness somewhere else," I continued. "But you don't get to come back and expect nothing to have changed." Her face tightened. "I guess I thought history counted for something." "It does," I said. "But it's not a reason to stay in something that stopped being honest." She didn't reply. She just looked at me like she finally saw the boundary she could never cross again. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said before walking away. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. A few weeks later, she sent one final email. Long, apologetic, full of explanations and memories. She said she hoped I could forgive her someday. I read it once and archived it. I didn't respond. Forgiveness didn't mean I had to invite her back into my life. It just meant I no longer carried what she'd done. Over the next few months, I focused on building something new. Not a rebound. Not a replacement. Just a life that belonged only to me. Elena and I continued to spend time together. Slowly, carefully, we started calling it dating. There was no rush, no pressure to define everything, just respect and curiosity. One afternoon, we were walking along the waterfront when she stopped and looked at me. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am," I told her, because I finally understood that losing someone who doesn't value you isn't really a loss at all. It's the start of getting back everything you gave up trying to please them. And that was the real lesson. Marriage isn't sustained by obligation or habit. It survives on honesty, effort, and mutual respect. The moment you start calling betrayal an experiment or a test, you've already chosen to end it. I used to think I'd never recover if my marriage failed. But the truth was simpler. The only thing worse than it ending was pretending it was still real. When I finally stopped pretending, I got my life back.